My name is Sam, and I was raised in a quaint village in the Scottish Highlands. I've seen and experienced some peculiar things in my life. One summer day in 1991, when I was about 12 years old, I was strolling through the old village when one of my mates rushed out of his house to ask me if I had seen what he referred to as a wolf bear. I told him no, that I had never seen anything that resembled a wolf bear, so he proceeded to tell me about his father spotting it and how it tried to attack one of their sheep. I didn't give it much thought until a few weeks later when I was walking home and I saw this enormous hunched creature about 10 meters away from the tree line in the forest. It was indeed colored like a wolf, but it was massive. There was a small patch of forest between where I was standing and my path home. I froze in place, unsure of what I was seeing. I couldn't make out its legs or head due to the undergrowth, and it seemed to have its head down, possibly feeding on something. I wasn't about to walk past this colossal beast, and suddenly it darted off like a bolt of lightning. As soon as it was out of sight, I sprinted home as fast as I could. When I got home, I told my mom and dad about it, and they said that my Uncle Angus, who lived just down the road from us, had seen it too, and that it had killed his black Scottish terrier. Uncle Angus was a retired Royal Navy officer and quite the tough guy. Dad said Uncle Angus was on a mission. Uncle Angus had a Saturday morning ritual of practicing archery in our backyard because there was nothing but forest behind us. Every Saturday, as soon as I finished breakfast, I would rush out the back door to go down to where he was shooting arrows, hoping they would let me try one. This day, when I got to the end of the porch, I heard a loud yell coming from Uncle Angus's yard. My dad shouted for me to get in the house. I didn't know what was happening, but I was already about 10 meters off the back porch watching Uncle Angus run down the hill yelling, "I got that beast right in the eye." My dad, a former Royal Marine, didn't mess around much when he told me to do something. He called my name again and told me to get back inside the house. I walked back up on the porch and Mom walked out with me. We watched Uncle Angus walk down from his yard to the road and stop maybe 20 feet from whatever he shot. My dad walked towards the feed pile that Uncle Angus had set up to trap this creature, and he stopped maybe 30 feet away. My dad asked Uncle Angus what he had shot, and Uncle Angus said, "I have no bloody clue what that is. It's hideous." Dad turned around and saw me and Mom on the porch and told us to get back in the house because we didn't need to be any part of what was going on. Mom ushered me back in the house as we waited for Dad to return from whatever he and Uncle Angus were doing. So my dad returns about 3 hours later, and he was not acting his usual self. I asked him what Uncle Angus shot, and he told me Uncle Angus didn't shoot anything and not to ever mention it again. I spent a lot of time over at Uncle Angus's because he just lived down the road. So I asked him what he shot, and he said he didn't know what I was talking about. But when I got home, I got a scolding for asking him, and my dad told me to forget anything to do with that day. A couple of years later, I got into some serious camping in those woods, and we would always hear bizarre sounds. Sometimes it was like a lamb bleating, and other times it sounded like a woman wailing, but it scared the daylights out of me and my mates. We left the woods more than once because of those noises, and my dad said it was just foxes and they wouldn't harm anything. So one night, me and one of my childhood friends were camping out maybe a half a mile back in the woods in a high spot above a creek that was maybe 150 meters away. We heard that eerie lamb bleating sound coming up the hill towards where we were at. It was really cold that night because we only camped out in the winter, but we had heavy-duty military sleeping bags. We had a good-sized fire built, and I had my dad's bolt-action .22 rifle with me, and I figured if something came up on the campsite, I was just going to shoot it. I turned around to look at my friend, and he was building all these little fires all around his sleeping bag. I asked him what the hell he was doing and if he heard those sounds. He said yeah, he heard them, and they were going to have to run through fire to get to him. I told him he was a fool, and I turned back around towards the fire. I saw 2 large tall ears and 2 large eyes, and I did not hesitate to shoot. To say my reflexes kicked into overdrive is an understatement because I was 50 meters away before my friend had a chance to sit up. He yelled for me to wait for him as he ran through the woods to catch me. I didn't even bother to bring a flashlight because I figured if something was crazy enough to come up on the fire, I didn't want any part of it. We came out of the woods about 100 meters from my back porch, and Dad was on the porch waiting for us, wanting to know why I discharged my gun in the middle of the night. I told him a fox had come up on the campfire, and he started laughing. All of a sudden, you could hear the loud lamb bleating sound right on top of where we were camping. I looked up at my dad, and he had a seriously concerned look on his face, which was not common for my dad. He told us to go down in the basement and spend the rest of the night. We went back to get our camping stuff the next morning, and nothing was disturbed. We didn't hear any strange sounds or anything, so we got our stuff and left. The thing about what I shot at is this. In my head, I thought it was a fox because all I saw was ears and eyes, but I never thought about how high they were off the ground. The eyes had to be at least 3 feet high, and that's no fox. I did not realize this until I heard so many different stories about the wolf bear. As the years went by and my Uncle Angus passed away, my dad and I spent a lot of time together. I had already moved out on my own for a couple of years. My dad would call me at least twice a week, if not more, just to go for a drive or to get something to eat or go for a milkshake. We were pretty close. One day we were driving and talking about Uncle Angus and how eccentric he was. We were laughing at some of the wild things he did throughout the years, and I remembered him shooting what we called the wolf bear. I asked Dad about it, and he pulled off the side of the road the second I questioned him about it. He gripped the steering wheel real tight and told me he had already warned me about asking him about what happened that day. I was a bit like Uncle Angus and told him I didn't really care about what he told me 13 years earlier because I wasn't a little boy anymore and I wanted to know what happened. He looked at me and his face was pale as a sheet and he said, "Lad, I don't know what that was, but it wasn't anything natural." I asked him what that meant, and he just said that he didn't want to ever talk about it and for me to please never ask him about it again. My dad was fearless, but this had him scared. After listening to hundreds of different wolf bear stories over the years, I believe what my uncle killed and he and my dad buried was probably one of those wolf-type bear men. All I know is what I experienced, and it was exceptionally strange. In the years since then, all the land behind where I grew up was developed, and we never heard those eerie cries or wails anymore. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Do what you will with it. I know it's not typical, but what is typical when dealing with a possible cryptid? I've got to tell you, your channel has been a godsend. It's like a soothing balm for my frazzled nerves. But I'll be straight with you, it hasn't calmed me enough to ever set foot in any city, mall, or even a crowded park again. Seriously, sometimes I can't even muster the courage to step outside my apartment. My family thinks I've lost it. My friends think I'm being overly dramatic. And the cops, they literally told me to stop wasting their time and see a shrink. But I'll tell you exactly what I saw. I'm sure you'll believe me. People need to know about this. It's important. So here's the thing. I traveled about an hour from my home to do some urban exploring in the heart of New York City. I'm not big on city life or anything, but I recently lost my job. I just wanted a change of scenery, maybe even some cool cityscape shots for my Instagram. A little adventure, you know? I parked and just started wandering. I didn't follow a specific route, I made my own. My phone was set to track my path so that I wouldn't get lost. Technology, right? As I was wandering, I got some pretty nice pics of towering skyscrapers, some interesting graffiti, and even a street performer. I was really enjoying myself, making my own way and just breathing. I had been going for almost 2 hours when I saw an old, abandoned building. It wasn't too far from me and the entrance was accessible. When I got to the building, I peeked inside and it was pitch black. So I turned on my phone's flashlight and that's when I realized this was an old warehouse. I got a little carried away, thinking about how I had discovered an abandoned warehouse, wondering if anyone else had ever been here. It was thrilling. Of course, I stepped in. I went in a few feet. I was being super careful, but I could see a concrete floor beneath me. I felt safe, so I kept walking forward, following the light from my flashlight, taking a picture here and there. I was maybe 20 or 30 feet in when I realized I was in a huge hall. A warehouse hall. There were a few doors in the walls surrounding the hall. I picked the closest one to me and looked in. It was another room. I could tell it was big enough to walk through, so I stepped through the door and carefully walked a few more feet. I heard a rustling sound. I stopped walking, thinking maybe I had disturbed something. I looked all around on the ground and saw nothing. I heard the rustling again. When I raised my phone up to look ahead of me, I saw a figure, only like not a figure. It was fully clothed in rags and looked really malnourished. It was crouched down on its hands and feet about 4 feet in front of me. It was so pale, like maybe it had never seen the light of day. Its face was sunken in and I could clearly see its cheekbones. It had all black eyes, not just the pupils like us, but all black. Between its hands on the ground was a half-eaten rat. I don't want to get too detailed because some people may have weak stomachs. I honestly thought I might hurl. I heard the rustling sound again and realized that it was making that noise. I don't know how I knew, but it was calling for its friends or family. Backup. I don't know, but it was trying to communicate and not with me. I moved back towards the way I came, but I kept my flashlight on it. It didn't seem to like the light too much. It didn't even try to move towards me at all. I was able to get back through the door. I took a quick look around and didn't see anything else. I ran for my life back the way I came. I could hear rustling and it was getting closer and louder. There had to be more than one. I felt like that rat, like I was being hunted. I was able to see the light from the original opening when I tripped. I dropped my phone and I'm not even gonna lie. I didn't even try to pick it up. I got right on up and got out of that building. I ran down those city streets. I was panting so hard, but my adrenaline would not let me stop. I only stopped when I was sure nothing had followed me. I realized I had no phone and no idea where I was. Honestly, I was just happy to be alive. I did eventually find a familiar street and managed to make it back to my car. I went to the local police station, which was pointless. They wouldn't take me seriously, so I just drove home. I cried and screamed so much on the drive. When I got home, I checked my phone's location. When I used the satellite feature, all I could see was a dense cityscape, no abandoned warehouse. The last time I checked the location of my phone, it had moved over a mile away from the original place I dropped it. It only had about 3% battery left, so I'm sure it has long died. That's what happened. I feel like I could have been eaten. I am so lucky that I didn't freeze up. I honestly wish I had taken a picture when I first saw that pale figure. I didn't even think about it. All of my other pictures uploaded to the cloud. Anyways, please guys, don't go into any abandoned buildings. I mean, even buildings that have been explored are probably dangerous. I know I wouldn't go in one. In the heart of the bustling city, I had an encounter that forever altered my perception of urban life. I was around 13 or 14 at the time, living in a high-rise apartment in New York City. Every summer, my parents would send me to a week-long summer camp in the city's eastern district. The camp was an urban adventure theme, offering activities like rock climbing, archery, group games, and rooftop sing-alongs. The camp had 3 types of accommodations. The first was the penthouse suites, reserved for the older kids. The second was the loft apartments, akin to large open spaces with high ceilings. The third was the rooftop tents, where I was staying. The rooftop tent was a single-room structure, perched on the top of a high-rise building, surrounded by a 3-foot barrier to prevent anyone from falling off. It was open to the elements, but a slanted canvas roof protected us from rain. Each accommodation was about a quarter-mile apart, giving a sense of seclusion. Our group consisted of a counselor and about 6 kids. On the last night of camp, I was struggling to fall asleep. The city lights were unusually bright, and the sounds of the city were more noticeable than ever. I lay there, lost in my thoughts, when I began to notice a distinct sound that gradually became more distinguishable from the usual city noises. It sounded like faint rustling, but as the sound grew closer, I could tell that something was moving across the rooftops. I started listening closer, feeling a little nervous. The sound was getting progressively louder, and it started sounding like the noise was being made by the footsteps of a person rather than an animal. It was approaching from the south, which led towards the depths of the city, instead of from the north, where the camp facilities were located. That definitely made me think that it wasn't a counselor or someone coming to alert us of something. When I realized that, my curiosity changed to fear. I tried to roll over as quietly as I could to sit up and take a look over the barrier. As I did, I heard a slight rustling sound coming from my left. The other kids were still asleep, but I saw that the counselor who was sleeping with us in the rooftop tent was awake. He had rolled over in his cot to grab my attention when he saw that I was about to get up. He held up his hand to signal me to stop as soon as we made eye contact. I did what he told me and lay back down. I was just holding my breath and listening as hard as I could. The footsteps had stopped, which made me even more nervous since I had no idea where the thing was. Then I heard a strange sound that was like flapping. The counselor got out of his cot as quietly as he could, and I couldn't help myself. I followed him. As soon as we looked over the barrier, we saw this bizarre creature swoop out of the sky and land on the rooftop below us. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen or heard of before. It was tall, dark, and winged, with glowing red eyes that shone in the darkness. It was like me and the counselor were just frozen there. And as we were staring down, the creature looked up and locked eyes with me. I don't know how to explain it, but I almost felt as if it had been seeking me out specifically. The creature didn't move, and it was like it was just studying us with this piercing gaze that felt like it went right through us. The silence then was almost deafening, and I was barely breathing, waiting for it to make its next move. And then it spread its wings and took off, soaring up into the city's skyline and disappearing in the darkness. We were basically just paralyzed with fear and didn't know what to do next. We stayed huddled in the rooftop tent for the rest of the night. There was no way we were going to venture anywhere not knowing where that thing had gone. And we didn't want to wake up the others and have a full-blown panic going on. At least it was only a couple hours until sunrise. And when it got light enough and everyone woke up, the counselor just calmly as possible herded us all to where the main camp was and settled us in the dining area. He ordered us to stay put while he went and talked to the camp director. The other kids didn't know what was going on, and I just did not want to talk about it at all. There was such a weird mood in the camp that morning while we waited for our parents to pick us up. It was a complete contrast to the usual last day shenanigans that would usually be going on. I don't know what the counselors told the parents. I did tell my mom and dad what I had seen. It's hard to know what they really thought. From that day on, I never looked at the city in the same way again. I had experienced something that hardly anyone would believe, and it really changed me. This was a few summers back when I had gone to visit my cousin's place. We lived in a quaint village in southern Spain. My cousin had just learned to ride a bike, but his father had already confiscated it for not adhering to some rule. So we were really bored, and there wasn't anything we felt like doing, so we decided to walk to the small market square. The walk there was quite lengthy. We had to cross some cobblestone streets and follow a narrow alleyway. By the time we got there, it was getting late. It was the weekend, and we thought we might run into someone we knew. We browsed through a couple of the stalls, but there was nothing interesting, so we went over to the little plaza. You know how it is when you're a kid and everything just seems dull. We were sitting on the fountain edge, and I spotted 2 local police cars parked at the end of the market square near this old bakery. My cousin thought they were probably searching for 2 boys who had been stealing fruits from the local orchards. We decided to start heading back since it was almost like 10 p.m. at that point. and I wasn't looking forward to the long walk back through the narrow streets and cobblestones in the dark. So we were walking past the bakery, about to turn the corner, and I heard a drone. My cousin thought it was a police drone looking for the fruit thieves. I highly doubted they would go so far as to use a drone for such a minor crime. But I started to feel worried that the police might mistake us for the fruit thieves they were looking for. We were walking across the street from the police cars, and I tried not to act suspicious even though we hadn't done anything wrong. We rounded the corner and we came to the vast vineyard behind the market square. At the end of the vineyard, there are these dense olive groves. And it was at the boundary of the vineyard and the olive groves that we saw something peculiar. It was like a massive disc-like object that was floating there in midair. It was hovering just above the olive trees. It's kind of hard to describe it accurately, but it was like two discs stacked on top of each other, with the upper one slightly extending to the right and the lower one to the left. Both ends had these blue lights that were glowing and pulsing. Maybe it was because it was so dark, but the glowing seemed like it spread over a really large area. The object was enormous, and its shape seemed incompatible for an airborne object. I was completely bewildered by the scene in front of me. I could still hear the sound of a drone, but I didn't see any sign of one. Instead, I found myself staring at this impossible object suspended in midair. My cousin, who I knew wasn't really a believer in UFOs or aliens, was still insisting that it was some kind of police drone looking for the fruit thieves, which in my mind sounded more gullible than believing in UFOs for God's sake. I mean, if we had drones like that, I'm pretty sure it would be top secret and not floating around in a vineyard. It was definitely not a drone. Its shape was just a disc, without wings or propellers. The fact that it was so huge and was able to stay suspended in midair was inexplicable, and it was positioned at an odd angle. I remember the next part clearly. I lifted my phone up to take a picture, and the object suddenly started spinning toward us. It was totally surreal. It spun really fast, like it was a propeller itself. You could hear the sound of the wind as it was cutting through the air. I was completely stunned. My mind was struggling to make sense of what was happening. It was like the object was responding to my phone. My cousin started panicking and pushed my hands down. Then the spinning motion immediately stopped, and the object began to reposition itself, lifting up a little and started to move toward the market square. I have to tell you, the drone sound hadn't been coming from the object. The drone we heard had appeared in front of the disc-shaped object, almost like it was escorting it away. The drone didn't look like a conventional one, though. Maybe it was because I was on the verge of hysteria, but it seemed to have a distorted shape and its lights were unusually bright. The lights were on inside it, which I thought was really weird for a drone flying around in the dark. I can't emphasize enough how unsettling the whole situation was. The object and the drone were hovering right above us, and it felt like we were in the middle of something that could be catastrophic. The sound of the drone blades was deafening, and the size of the object was mind-boggling. My cousin kept trying to rationalize it as some sort of police drone, but I knew deep down that it was not of this world. The way it moved, the lights, the sound, everything about it was just so strange and otherworldly. When you see something that doesn't fit into any category, it's like your brain just can't process it. My brain didn't know what to do with this information, and it was incredibly unnerving. It was like everything I thought I knew about the world was being questioned. But all we could do after all that was to just walk away. I looked back a few times, but then we both just wanted to get home as quickly as possible. It's strange to think that I used to think a close encounter would be cool, but after that experience, I don't ever want to go through something like that again. Benny and I, we were both working this boring corporate job. Then came 2019, the year that recession hit. We were both laid off, just like that. We didn't have any major obligations, and we thought, why not take this opportunity to do something we've always wanted to do? So we decided to go on a road trip. You know, the classic American road trip. Route 66, the whole shebang. We packed up Benny's old truck with enough food and camping gear for 2 weeks. We started our journey from Chicago, looking forward to exploring the open road. It was exhilarating, escaping from the corporate jungle to the actual wilderness. 3 days into our journey, we decided to camp for the night in Oklahoma. We found a cozy spot next to a lake, set up our tent, and started a fire. We even caught a few fish from the lake and roasted them over the fire. I gotta tell you, those were some of the best tasting fish I've ever had. The night was calm, and there was a slight breeze. We got into our tent and crashed. But around midnight, we heard something. Something weird. It sounded like something, or someone, was outside our tent. And trust me, it didn't sound like any animal we knew. Benny, brave as always, wanted to go out and check. I told him to hold up. Maybe whatever it was would just go away. But the noise kept getting louder and closer. Then we did it. We unzipped the tent just a crack to peek outside. And what we saw, man, it was like something out of a horror movie. This hulking, hairy figure was moving around our campfire. It was on 2 legs like a man, but it was no man. It was at least 7 feet tall. We were frozen with fear. We sat there, barely breathing, thinking this was it. We were in deep trouble. This creature, it had these glowing red eyes, and its face looked like something out of a nightmare. It let out a loud, guttural growl that sent chills down our spines. Benny, he had brought this flare gun for emergencies. He grabbed it and fired a shot into the sky. The creature let out a deafening howl and bolted into the darkness. We didn't sleep a wink that night. As soon as dawn broke, we packed up and got the hell out of there. We didn't stop driving until we reached a small town. We went straight to a diner, ordered a ton of food, and over a cup of coffee, we talked about what we'd seen. The locals overheard us, and they didn't seem surprised. Some of them even started arguing about the local legends of a beast in the woods. Benny and I thought about reporting it, but decided against it. We just wanted to forget the whole experience. But I gotta tell you, it's hard to forget something like that. Sometimes, I wonder if we should have continued our road trip. But who knows what that thing was capable of? Anyway, that's my story. Hard to believe, right?